Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, welcome everybody. It's fantastic to see you all here today. I think most of you know me, but if not, I'm Martin Polly. I'm the director of the International Centre for Sports History and Culture here at De Montfort, and along with my colleague Heather Dictor, co-scientific director for the De Montfort module of the FIFA Master. And today is all about celebrating that amazing programme. It's the 25th anniversary year of the FIFA Master. So each of the three universities involved, ourselves for Humanities, Bocconi School of Management in Milan for Management, and the University of Neuchâtel for Sports Law, will be staging events over the course of the year. And obviously, as we're history, we go first, because you need to know about the old stuff first, right? So today is the first of a three-part celebration. And we've taken the theme of the Olympics, and so we're going to have three papers on different aspects of Olympic history. And then after the break, we'll have an in-conversation with one of the FIFA MA alumni, Primrose, who works at the International Olympic Committee. We'll say more about her at the start. So on behalf of the Centre, I'd like to welcome you all to this programme and thank you for your support. I'm now going to pass on for two other welcomes. First off to Pierre Cornu from CIES, and then to Jill Cowley from the faculty here at De Montfort. Pierre, you have the floor.
So good afternoon, everybody. Introductions have more or less been made. So I might maybe just begin saying, dear all, dear friends. It's a privilege for me to say some words to you on behalf of CIES, International Centre for Sport Studies. It's always a personal pleasure for me to be in Leicester, visiting the city and saying hello to King Richard III, meeting my friends at De Montfort University, and meeting the FIFA Master students, this time the 25th edition. 30 years ago, then FIFA President Sepp Blatter, and then University of Neuchâtel Professor Pierre-Marco Zen-Ruffinen had a vision. The sport was developing fast. The business of sport was developing even faster, but there were gaps on the academic side. So they decided to create an institution that would be dedicated to research, education, and consulting in the field of sport, and by the way, not only of football. The CIES was born in cooperation with FIFA and the University of Neuchâtel, of course, but also the state and city of Neuchâtel. And almost immediately, the idea came that for a successful development of sport organizations, one needed good people, good sports managers. But not only specialists in marketing or communication or law or whatever else. No, one needed managers who would have a global, today one would probably say holistic, thinking, view and approach to sport. People who would be able to think out of the box, in particular thanks to an education that put them in touch with people and organizations with different cultures in different countries. So the question was how to achieve this. And the answer right now might seem quite obvious. But at the time, it was very new. The idea was to create a master course that would be composed of modules about humanities, economy, and the law of sport. Each module being delivered in a different country. For this, the CIES needed partners with a strong reputation, of course, in their respective fields. And partners who would be interested in such a partnership. For obvious reasons, University of Neuchâtel was an easy choice for the law module. SDA Bocconi in Milan was a natural pick given its worldwide reputation in economics. And of course, DMU was obviously the first choice for the humanities module. And here I have to really read my notes. DMU being the world's leading research center for the study of the history and culture of sport. A piece of luck, the three universities accepted to enter these partnerships. The three universities accepted to be a decisive part in this adventure. And the FIFA Master could start. At the beginning, there were questions. Will we really achieve our goal? How will this look like in 5 years? Can we get the students we want? Will there be enough funding? What will that look like in real life? But now, here we are celebrating this 25th anniversary of what has been, from the very start, an extremely successful program, receiving significant awards. One might get used to success, but it's always nice to remember that year after year, we are at the top of SportBusiness European list. Getting significant awards, I said, but also attracting top students from all around the world and with very different backgrounds. Students who, after graduation, make a difference for the organizations which employ them, or in developing, that happens, their own businesses. And it's not just by chance that right now, almost 10% of the very large FIFA staff is composed of FIFA Master alumni. And that many alumni hold key positions in top sports federation, High Primrose, where is she? In clubs, in ministries, and in other organizations with a link to sport. Of course, we need to work hard to keep that program as successful as it is now, and read my lips. That's exactly what CIES and the three universities are doing right now. But today, we're here to celebrate. We're not here to work hard, except for the four speakers of the day. And celebrate, we will. With a great program, organized, prepared by our friends at DMU. Thank you very much. And I just would like to conclude these short words with many thanks to DMU, of course, for organizing this, to the speakers, and particularly Primrose, who came a long way from Lausanne, about the same way I did, to be with us today. And of course, to thank FIFA. Solomon is not here right now. No, didn't see Solomon. Anyway, let's thank FIFA, without whom there would be no CIES and no FIFA Master program. And to thank you all for sharing these moments with us. Enjoy the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre. It's great to welcome you back to Leicester. I'd now like to pass over to Jill Cowley, the Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Design and Humanities, within which the programme sits.
Hey, good afternoon. So it was really great, Pierre, to hear that historical context from the perspective of CIES. I'm going to say a little bit now about what the programme means for us here at DMU and how our values and the values born out of those conversations in the early days have really come together. So DMU is a dynamic educational institution. We've got a long history of improving people's lives through education. We're multicultural, we are diverse. We have over 30,000 students and 3,500 staff from over 130 different countries around the world. And this echoes our location here in the East Midlands, in Leicester, the first city in the most recent census to be classed as a plural city, which means that no one ethnicity holds the majority within our city. DMU was also recently awarded the very first Silver Race Equality Charter mark in the UK. And I mention all of this because the FIFA Masters programme exhibits to me these values of diversity and multiculturalism that is at the heart of DMU and of Leicester and the region. It's one of the reasons I think that this is such a long-running and successful partnership. The FIFA Masters programme understands very much the power of a global mindset, something Pierre referred to earlier on. And it bases itself on a community of practice that is about bringing together cultural difference. And each year we see over 20 countries represented within our student body, every year. And every year we're made more and more aware of the necessity of this and of this type of programme. Yes, it serves the programme well to have that global representation, but also it serves the industries in which you're going to move, and it serves the societies in which we live, and it pushes perhaps against some of those tides of nationalistic myopia that sometimes threaten to engulf us. So education here at DMU has always been about gateway of opportunity. And we see that through the lens of communities of participation, of collective responsibility, and of individual transformation to create a fairer society, a more sustainable society. And we teach our students to be creative, to be imaginative, to think outside the box, to be unconventional, but also to challenge and to accept difference and embrace the unknown. Our strategy is that of the empowering university, and this builds upon several pillars. One of those is partnerships with purpose. And partnerships are not something to be taken lightly or for granted. Partnerships, I think, in the very true sense of the word, are about bringing benefits to all those concerned. They build each other up, they support each other, and they open up possibilities that the individuals wouldn't have access to by themselves. Partnerships are purposeful and they are enabling, and as such they are worth the work that has gone into them. And again, Pierre alluded to the amount of work that went into this partnership at the beginning and that still continues to be there today. And it's had many twists and turns, since the turn of the century when this programme was conceived, many twists and turns, changes of personnel, changes of government, changes of regulations, and it is testament, I think, to the people involved in this, that we are where we are today and that the programme has gone from strength to strength. 25 years together is a long time, and 25 years absolutely stronger and better. Every year Martin emails me and says, FIFA Masters is the best sports management programme, postgraduate programme in Europe again, now for the 12th year. Every year he emails me, and I've started to take that a little bit for granted. But clearly that reflects the partnership and the purposeful nature of that. It reflects the diligent work of all the people involved and the care for the students that you all clearly have. So on behalf of DMU, on behalf of our part of the partnership, first of all, thank you to CIES for the opportunity 25 years ago, and for the ways in which we've been able to work together to improve and enhance that over the years. I welcome you all here. It's a really special occasion. I'm delighted that we are essentially launching your 25th year celebrations, and I hope that you have equally great events in Italy and in Switzerland throughout the year. So thank you for your attendance. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the best for today. I hope it goes really well. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Okay, Matt.
Thanks very much. I'll just introduce myself. So my name's Matthew Taylor. Matt Taylor. I'm a Professor of History and I'm a member of the International Centre for Sports History and Culture. I really enjoyed those introductions as well because it's making me feel quite old because I was one of the people, I think with other people here like Sue and others, who taught on that first year as I was a junior research fellow at the time. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear about that and I'm really delighted to see how the course has developed and has, as everyone said, gone from strength to strength. So I'm really happy as well to be asked to chair the academic papers. What we're going to do, we're going to have three excellent papers, I think.
No pressure.
No pressure. Where I think that we're going to have about 20-25 minutes for the presentations with around about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So I will be reminding the speakers by putting my hand up here. Dick, I'm looking at you particularly. When you have 5 minutes left, read it. So, first speaker, it really doesn't need an introduction, but I will give him a short one anyway. So, Martin Polly, of course, is the director of the International Centre for Sports History and Culture. Been director since 2014. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. He's also a leading historian of the Olympics, of course, which is why it's so, pertinent that he's giving the first paper. He's the author of a book a lot of you may know, The British Olympics, Britain's Olympic Heritage, 1612 to 2012. And he's currently preparing a book on the Cotswold Olympics, which we're really looking forward to read. His paper today is on the pioneers, the first Black British Olympians.
Thanks very much. And I promise no Cotswold mentions whatsoever today. So thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone. Ethnic diversity, as I think illustrated in Jill's brief words there, is something that is very easy to take for granted in the UK, certainly in many UK cities now. And so the ethnic diversity of the British Olympic team, I think, is something often taken for granted as the norm. Now, of course, it's still an issue worthy of critical questioning, especially around the distribution of ethnic populations across different sports. While track and field athletics and boxing have a very high number of Black athletes, sports such as equestrianism, archery and swimming are still disproportionately predominantly white. There are also, of course, differences between summer and winter Olympic teams. However, the Black presence in British Olympic teams is a crucial historical question. And it's very easy, too easy, to see the 1970s and onwards as the key period here, linked to the coming of age of the children of the Windrush generation of Caribbean migrants. What I want to do here today is to shift the focus a little bit by going further back, 70, 80 years further back. And I want to shed some light on the lives of 3 much earlier Black British Olympians from pre-Windrush days. My agenda, I guess, is similar in part to Miranda Kaufman's work on Black Tudors, or indeed, putting myself in very elevated company, to Steve McQueen's new film Blitz, which clearly is an attempt to reposition Black lives in the history of the British home front. And I want to encourage us to widen out our view. Now, I need to start with a content note, and I'd like to thank my friend Chris Ember, who is not here yet, but will hopefully be here soon, for his guidance. Oh, Chris is there. Thank Chris. To thank Chris for his guidance on this. Some of the sources used in this presentation contain language based on racial stereotyping of their age, both some in the written and some that I'll be speaking as well. And again, I want to thank Chris for really helpful conversations on making me think of my privileged position as a white historian and the responsibility that brings to me when writing and speaking about Black history. So I want to look at 3 individuals in case study mode here. Louis, or Lewis Bruce, I'll be sticking with Louis, but it's probably interchangeable. Unfortunately, the only public domain photograph we have of him is not in playing sport, but in his career as a tram driver. Then athlete Harry Edward and athlete Jack London. And I want to take them in order based on the Olympics at which they competed, looking at their backgrounds, their Olympic careers, their other careers. Remember, of course, these were amateur days, so none of them had sport as their means of income. And I want to think about how they've been remembered and also how they were often forgotten and what we're now doing to try and overcome that forgetfulness. I need to stress, I think, again, going back to Jill's point about multiculturalism, all of these men competed for the Great Britain Olympic team at a time of imperialism. So a time when racial hierarchies about the empire were very, very strict and rigid. Okay, so let's take them then one at a time. We're going to start with Louis Bruce. Louis, born in 1875, died in 1958, and he competed as a wrestler in the 1908 London Olympics. So our first case study. And Bruce was quite literally forgotten for decades. It's not that he was written out of the record, it's just literally nobody ever wrote him in the first place. Unfortunately, now that's changed. But he holds a key place because he was Britain's first black British Olympian. We think the 6th black Olympian overall, taking all nations in, but the first black British. So Louis Bruce, I'll explain that picture again in more detail in a moment. Louis Bruce was born in Edinburgh in 1875 in the suburb of village then of Morningside. And genealogist Madeline Smith has helped me with work on this because Louis has a very problematic family background. His mother, a lady called Jane Elizabeth Doney, was a widow from just outside Plymouth in Devon. She already had 6 children, and she seems to have gone to Edinburgh in order to have this baby, who was declared on the birth register as illegitimate, and no father was ever named. Now, Plymouth then, as now, even more so then, was a major imperial military seaport, with sailors from all around the world and empire as a transient population. All we can do is speculate is that one of these sailors was the father of the baby, but there's absolutely no documentation at all. We suspect then that Jane, a widow with 6 young daughters, went to Scotland to hide an illegitimate pregnancy, one where she knew the baby would be black. And I think it's really important to pause on this, on what was going through her mind. What were the cultural norms at the time for a white woman to have an illegitimate black baby? I say Louis' birth registration records him as illegitimate, the father isn't named. And where we see him arriving in the English documentation is in this example here. Don't worry, I'm not going to test you on what's going on here. This is a census return from 1881. And I've squared there in yellow Louis' entry. Louis Bruce marked as a visitor, age 5. And he was living with his grandmother in Plymouth, not far from where his mother and 6 half-sisters lived, but not living in the family home. His mum remarried, but still did not bring Louis into the family home. So we can only guess the family structures and the notions of stigma that might be going on around Louis as a child. Now, this does give us insight, I think, onto the presence of a black child in a white family. So by the 1901 census, he had moved to London. And we don't have any action pictures of him. So I've had to make do with an action picture of 2 Finns wrestling at the 1908 Olympics. So we just got this as a sense of the venue inside the White City Stadium on a platform there. Louis took part in the catch as catch can heavyweight category, which took place on the 20th of July 1908. He won his first round bout against Arthur Banbrook of Great Britain, and then lost to Edward Nixon, also of Great Britain. Remember the 1908 Olympics, everyone? That's the way to win the Olympics, only have British teams. And he lost in the 2nd round. But, and this is the key thing, he's listed, you have to maybe take my word for it, in the top text box there as L. Bruce, literally L. Bruce. That was common in athletic records and sporting newspapers at the time to record people only by the forename initial. So this is the official report of 1908. We have him just as L. Bruce. And in some of the early press reports, and nobody has yet pinned down exactly where, but that L was turned not into Louis, his real given name, but into Lawrence. So he's gone from L. Bruce to somewhere in the press round about that time as Lawrence Bruce. So he entered history as an error, as a mistake, which means that we simply did not know about him. And even Milan and Buchanan, in their phenomenally exhaustive almanac of the 1908 Olympics, list him as Lawrence. He was literally lost to history. And he was restored just within the last 2 years, thanks to some fantastic research by amateur Olympic historians Conor Marr and Rob Gilmore, who were working on tidying up the the discrepancies, the errors in the 1908 official report, and working around and creating more reliable databases. And basically, they asked themselves if the L. Bruce who wrestled at 1908 was the same L. Bruce that they'd seen coming up in the sporting press at the time. And this, the next slide is the problematic one, because this L. Bruce wrestled under the name of Darky Bruce, as we got in here. Darky Bruce, the coloured heavyweight champion. And they saw Darky Bruce named in the local press, in the West London press, in the sporting press around the Olympic period. This one is from February 1909, so just a few months after the Olympics. It's from a match, a boxing and wrestling evening at the Hammersmith Baths in Lime Grove, which is about half a mile from the Olympic Stadium and about 1 mile from where, guess what, a tram driver called Louis Bruce, who'd been born in Edinburgh in 1875, was living. And these two glued it all together. They recovered the story. And then the final piece for the jigsaw was coming up with a wrestling archive that was held in a wrestling club in Wigan called the Snake Pit, which happened to include all of the registration papers from 1908. And for that, they were able to find Louis Bruce's registration, his club, his address, and it was the same person. And so what we've got is that initial error of L. Bruce, dropping him out, and then the tragedy of the sporting press referring to him by the racial stereotypical name of Darky. And genuinely, this is such an awful moment. It is far easier to trace this guy in the press by using the search term Darky Bruce than it is by using his real name. I really think we've got to pause. That's nothing against the people that run the amazing databases now. It's about the text of the time. As my colleague Dave Dee has pointed out in his forthcoming book, it's, you know, the black boxers were often encouraged to draw attention to their ethnicity, and in billings and newspaper coverage to drum up interest from fight fans. So the multiple black and mixed race boxers who use the epithet Darky in their ring names. And this practice, as Dave shows, was still going on in the 1960s. So what we've got here is very much a normalization of otherness. So once the L. Bruce of the report was identified, things fell into place. They showed that he was a tram driver for the London United Tramways, that he was one of the first black tram drivers in London, and they found this wonderful picture from 1906. Obviously, it's a bit pixelated as I've zoomed in, but it shows Bruce driving a tram with the mayor of Kingston, a gent called Henry Min, at a ceremonial event in 1910. This is a high prestige position. He was clearly well rated in the tram company. He became a supervisor of the trams in 1911. He was a very well respected individual. And alongside that, he also maintained this amateur sporting career as a wrestler, where we find him in the Olympics, also as a boxer, also as a race walker. He won a 1 mile race walk at Griffin Park, Brentford's ground. And he was also a singer and dancer at tram and transport club social events. So you've got this really, really interesting, rich life of entertainment and sport going on here. And it's only in 1911, when he got married, that finally we see a father named as William Bruce, medical practitioner, but nobody has ever traced this. Completely gone. And we think it was just but possibly it's somebody who delivered him, possibly it's a doctor he met along the way. We've got no idea. Nobody has traced this fictional father. He obviously didn't want the father bit of his marriage certificate blank. He left the trams in 1930. He was running a newsagent shop in Sutton, in Surrey, and he died in 1958 at the age of 82, leaving behind him an estate of £6,000, around about 112,000 in today's money. So clearly did very well from his business. But as I say, he was forgotten. However, we are now remembering him. He was remembered by London Transport in 2021 when they created a tube map of black history. And you can see that in the real world of Wimbledon, they basically redid the whole tube map with key figures from black history. And they gave Lewis, and spelt it with the WIS spelling, they gave him Wimbledon. Now, at the time, that was in recognition of his impact as the first black tram driver. They have now amended the citation to bring in his Olympic history. And he has been remembered now, this went up last year, in the house in St Peter's Grove, Hammersmith, where he lived, with a plaque put up by the Nubian Jack Community Trust, an organisation devoted to commemorating through plaques and statues Black history. And so this went up just last year, being unveiled here by the Mayor and members of the community there. So what we've gone from that as a wrestler, competing under a racist name, completely forgotten in the archive, and then the story put back together, and those years of forgetfulness now, I hope, corrected. Our second athlete, was Harry Edward, a sprinter who competed in the 100 and 200 metres at Antwerp in 1920. And while Edward had a much more high-profile career, both in and outside sport, there has also been an element of forgetfulness around him. And his story takes us into empire and transnational links and a post-sport life dedicated to fighting racism and segregation in the USA. So Edward has got the most fascinating life. He was born in Berlin, Germany, in 1898. His mother, Maria Magdalena, was a white woman from Berlin. His father was Vincent Edward, who was born in the British colony of Dominica, who apparently ran away to join the circus, one of those things that you can really have fun with looking up in the sources. He went to sea, he ended up in Germany, and he was working in catering. He was a maitre d' in a Berlin restaurant at the time of Harry's birth. So Harry was born there. Harry then, born in 1898, excelled at languages at school, fluent in French, English and German, talented athlete. He was running for clubs in Berlin in 1914, and he was on track to be, at the age of, he would have only been 17 or 18, in the German team for the 1960 Berlin Olympics, which obviously, as we all know, didn't happen. But instead, in 1916, not only had the Olympic plans withered and died, but Harry found himself in an internment camp. Because his dad was a British subject, Harry qualified as an enemy alien. So he was rounded up and interned at Ruhleben, just outside Berlin. And he spent 2 years in the internment camp. And despite the tough conditions there, he continued his language training and education. He studied accountancy and finance, and also took a full part in the inmates' sporting life. And then in 1919, after the war, Harry Edward was repatriated to Britain. He'd never set foot here before, but through his father's status, he was repatriated. Turns up in Leith off a ship across the North Sea, and then moves to London. And he got work very quickly, teaching French and German to businesses and in civil service. He worked as an accountant, and he took up night classes at the Regent Street Polytechnic. And that was obviously his way into the British athletic scene, the Regent Street Poly, with its Harriers, one of the best athletic clubs in the country. And he was coached by world-famous, well-remembered Sam Mussabini, and he joined the illustrious company of the Polytechnic runners. And in July 1920, he won the double of the 100 yards and the 220 yards at the Amateur Athletic Association Championships at Stamford Bridge. Now, the AAA Championship was really the world championship of the time, and he won the 100 and the 220. And this obviously put him in the frame for Antwerp. And here he is, seated at the front, standing immediately behind him, second in from the right, is the probably more famous Harold Abrahams. Harry is right in there in this team, and yet he was forgotten for so long. So he went to Antwerp. He became the first Black British track and field athlete at the Olympics, and he competed in the 100 and the 200. Now in the 100, this is Harry furthest away from me here, in the 100 he made it through the 3 rounds, and despite a confused start in the final, he finished in 3rd place in 10.9. Later that week, he won through the 3 rounds of the 200, injured a tendon in the semi-final, but still ran the final and came 3rd. So a haul of 2 bronze medals, Britain's first Black Olympic medalist. The Polytechnic magazine argued that the disorganised start of the 100 and the injury in the 200 cost Edward dear, and they wrote, quote, "Everybody was agreed that although Harry had the hardest luck at the games, he was the finest sprinter in the world." And this is a famous picture. If any of you have seen the movie Chariots of Fire, you'll be familiar with this bit of Paddock and Schultz, where the Mussabini character is analysing the photographs for how they finish. Broaden it out, and we've got Harry Edward. Again, I understand why he was cut out of that picture for effect, but I think it's a very symbolic moment of the Black British athlete, 3rd place, being literally cut from the record there. And Harry came back to Britain and carried on running, and his high point was 1922 at Stamford Bridge, where he beat where he was competing against his Antwerp teammate and future Olympian champion Harold Abrahams. And Abrahams described Harry as one of the most impressive sprinters I've ever seen. And then the following year, 1923, where these pictures come from, he created a record that was never matched at the AAAs, of winning the 100, the 220, and the 400, all within the space of an hour. And he met the king. Look at how placed this character is, and yet there's been an absence. So he moved to the US afterwards, originally to run as a pro, but then took on a whole range of other roles as well. And led a really fascinating life working with various Black, cooperative and Quaker organisations that saw him working in civil rights, humanitarian and anti-segregation causes. He worked for the UN Refugee Association in Greece after the war. This was him helping to find foster parents for Vietnamese children in the late 1950s. He was involved in campaigns against segregation in schools. And he wrote a memoir, which until this year was unpublished. It was sitting in the archive at Amsterdam. And he called it When I Passed the Statue of Liberty, I Became Black. And athletics journalist Neil Duncanson has edited it and brought it out this year. And that title needs a pause. If we compare with Darky Bruce, here's a man saying, when I passed the Statue of Liberty, I became black. And what Edward was saying, that his life in Germany, up to the age of 18, his life in England, he was never aware of racism, racial prejudice. And yet, and he writes, as I arrived in New York, the immigration officer observed my dark complexion, my curly hair, and recorded that I was a Negro. Thus it happened that I became black, a Negro, when passing the Statue of Liberty. Now, coming soon, we've got a blue plaque for him in London, at Huntley Street, Bloomsbury, one of his houses. So again, relatively forgotten, I think. Certainly that memoir lying unpublished. The Times didn't carry an obituary for him until 2021, when he died in 1973. I was honoured last year to write his Dictionary of National Biography entry, so we're doing some catching up, and the English Heritage Blue Plaque is part of that. Finally then, Jack London, not to be confused with the American adventure and travel writer of the same name. The third and final Olympic case study. So London was a sprinter who competed at the 1928 Olympics in Amsterdam. London was born in Demerara, British Guyana, in January 1905. His family moved to England when London was a child, so his father could study medicine. His father returned to the West Indies, and Jack and his mum stayed on. They were living variously in Newcastle and Birmingham. And then in the mid-1920s, Jack London moved, confusingly, to London, yet again, Polytechnic Harriers, and moved up very quickly as a 10-second, 100-yard runner. He was one of the first runners, certainly in this country, to use starting blocks rather than to just dig a hole in the cinder track as the start. And he made a big impact early on, and after an international event in 1927, he made the Olympic team for 1928. And he got through, that's one of his Polytechnic runs, and he got through to the final of the 100 metres in Amsterdam. Here he is in the centre of the picture, crossing the line. You won't be able to read it, but the caption here lists him as running for British Guyana, whereas the record books say he was running for Britain. A really interesting thing to play around with there, I think. He won he got the silver in the 100 metres and then a bronze as a member of the 4x100 relay team. And when he got back to the Polytechnic after Amsterdam, he was given the inaugural Sam Musabini Memorial Medal. Musabini, the coach, had died the previous year, and the Polytechnic wanted to honour him with this. And London, I love this, as he collected his award at the Harriers banquet, he, quote, promised that, as he had done his best to cover the ground in the shortest possible time to win the trophy, so it would be with his speech. He then carried on running, finally won a AAA in 1929 at Stamford Bridge, but his career ended soon after an injury. I love this picture, you just have to go with it. So if you ever want to think about ethnic minority representation in sport, just look at this picture of a British athletic team from 1929 with Harry Foran from the right in the second row from the back there. But unlike Edward's career, Jack London had a very different one. He signed up for a medical course at King's College London, but then dropped out. And he moved into the entertainment industry. He was the pianist in the first production of Noel Coward's Cavalcade at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. But his main credit, he's the guy in the white suit here, was as Mbappe, not that one, as Mbappe in a 1938 Gainsborough comedy film called Old Bones of the River, starring Will Hay. This is a deeply problematic of its time farce in which he plays the educated son of an African village chief who returns to smuggle booze and overthrow his brother. It's packed with stereotypes and tropes, including cannibalism, indigenous people being framed as savages, babies being referred to as pickaninnies, and so forth. And many of the black characters are played by white actors in blackface. But this is Jack London in the white suit there. Now, again, he died, he went on to he didn't make a huge money from this. At the time of his death, he was working in 1966 as a porter in a hospital in London and who lost touch with the Polytechnic. Recently, though, again, he's been honoured. Sorry, oh, that's one. He's been honoured with a plaque in Newcastle. Lily Crescent Jesmond have put up a plaque to him and hope there's more to come. And again, I was honoured to write his Dictionary of National Biography entry as well. Okay, conclude then very quickly. 3 lives, 3 Olympics over a 20-year span. What can we draw from these case studies? First off, I think these men's lives tell us a great deal about migration and transnational movement in the first decades of the 20th century. Let's think about Bruce's unrecorded father, Edward's family route from Guyana to Berlin to London via Leith to New Jersey and back to West Germany. Jack London's route from Demerara to Newcastle, Birmingham and London. They're living examples of migration, diaspora and settlement. They shed light, I think, on the wider lives of men who ran as amateurs, working in transport, teaching, accountancy, or as medical students alongside their athletic careers. Their lives take us into the interplay between sport and entertainment as spheres in which black men were presenting. Bruce's amateur song and dance routines at tram company socials through to Jack London's foray into the West End and cinema. The timing of their commemorative culture is really interesting. All of these plaques have been put up within the last 3 years. Their DNB entries commissioned many years after the athletes died. A reminder that putting up plaques and statues is just as important as tearing them down. And I think a final point is that they serve as a reminder that British Olympic teams have long contained diversity. It's an obvious point, but it's one always worth repeating to anyone who imagines an all-white history before Windrush. Thank you.
Martin, that's a great paper. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, so you put your hands up. Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Martin, for such a fascinating paper. One question, issue of racism. Listening to what you have said, it paints this picture that the issue of racism wasn't very much part of British sports at that time. Is it correct to reach such a conclusion, or maybe it's not quite wise to reach that conclusion?
Yeah, thanks. There's probably other people in here who are better qualified than me for this, but I'll give you a quick start. My sense is that the relative rarity of black athletes and black footballers and black rugby players probably meant that people were dealt with as individuals. Now, some of them will have then, like Louis Bruce, been called darky, have had those kind of their aspects of their appearance used as part of their image. Defenders of that would probably say, well, look, guys with red hair were called Ginger. Guys with curly hair were called Curly. That was just a part of the nicknaming at the time. My broad sense is that the relative rarity of black athletes in sporting circles meant that there wasn't the kind of institutional racism, the stacking, for example, that we saw in much later years. Yes, of course, there's name calling, but I think Harry Edward is such an interesting litmus test here, if you like. So Edward was born in Imperial Germany. His time in the internment camp, he said at one time they suggested putting the black inmates, of whom there are about 300 in one barracks, And everybody said, no, don't do that. And so the German officers didn't bother. He says he experienced no racism in Britain. And it's only when he got to America and he sees segregated spaces. The story that gets me so much from his memoir, his mum, who was, remember, a white German woman, came to visit in New York and she died while she was there. He called an undertaker. When Harry opened the door, the undertaker said, I don't deal with Negroes. And Harry said, come and look at the corpse. And when the undertaker saw it was a white woman, he said, okay, you've got my business. Yeah, it's stories like that he talks about in his time in America in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and his work against segregation in schools. So it's not as if he wasn't attuned to racism, and he simply doesn't report any whatsoever in Britain. I mean, the press at the time, you'll get things like the coloured champion, the runner from Guyana, things like this. But it's only through Louis Bruce where we see the epithet darky, certainly that I've seen that kind of evidence.
Okay, we might have a chance for one quick question. I'll ask you a very quick question. It'll have to be a quick answer. So, was there any influence of people like Arthur Walton, those who had a history who weren't Olympians but had a history of black runners?
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. Great question. I've not seen any. What I've seen. So I think Harry. Again, sorry, I have to take Harry Edward for the best model here, simply because he wrote a memoir, which is very, very detailed, and he makes no reference to Walton. He talks a lot about his athletic career, but he only talks about the people he worked with, coaches who he ran with, Sam Sabini, Harold Abrahams, other runners. He doesn't talk about anything. He certainly doesn't see himself as being part of a tradition, however small that tradition was. So beyond that, neither Louis Bruce nor Jack London left any writing behind. Certainly none of the press coverage I've seen draws attention to that. So no, I think it's very much, these are just a few individuals, and it's now us as historians that are starting to recognise any patterns.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
You're up next, Dick.
Okay.
So, very quick introduction to Richard Holt. So, Richard Holt's an emeritus professor at Neuchâtel University. For people who don't know, he's a former director at the International Centre for Sports History and Culture between 2007 and 2011. Is that right, Dick?
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. It's not very good on dates, so he's also, he's known for numerous books and articles on the history of sport. Most well known probably is Sport and the British, which is unquestionably, I think, a founding text of British sports history. And a revised version of that, or a new version of it, a new version will be published soon. Right. But also, Dick is an expert on the history of French sport. And I suppose the interconnection of those aspects is what Dick's going to talk about today. So, if you did.
Okay, thank you. I just pressed this down and okay, there we go. I'm very techy, you see. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to be back here. So many years I looked out at groups of students from the FIFA Master, and it was always such a privilege to be able to teach such an interesting and diverse group of people. It's definitely the best teaching of my academic career. And also it brings me back to the beginning in the first year of it when Ray Vampler, who set up the centre, and Pierre Franchi, who was pivotal in the beginning of the master course, asked me to come and take part in it. And we really had no idea how we were going to do this, but it sort of, just took shape. And I think the students' enthusiasm was a great thing in kind of making it work. And it remains so. And it's nice as well to come back to do something about the Olympics. When I was writing this, it made me think of how I started. And actually, I stumbled into sports history. I wasn't much good at sport, although I loved it. I was a historian looking for a subject. And in 1971, I read Eugene Weber's celebrated article, Gymnastics and Sports in Fin de siècle France, which is about Pierre de Coubertin and the creation of the modern Olympic Games. And I said to my supervisor, I'd like to do something on sport. He said, well, nobody's done anything on it, so why not have a go? And that's how I came into sports history. What is now 53 years ago, It's great to see you all here as well, to say 25 years on that the FIFA Master is going strong. So here's a big question for a special occasion. What do we mean by modernity? What do we mean by modernity, particularly in relation to sport? And modernity, particularly in relation to the Olympics as a mega event. At what point was Olympism established as a global phenomenon? That's the subject. And particularly, how can the Paris Olympics of 1924, which is the subject of an exhibition at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge at present, which Mike Cronin and I participated in creating, how can that clarify that question of what is modernity? The obvious answer, I mean, if you're just saying, what's the first Olympics? Well, the simple answer to that is up there, and 1896, in, as you will know, the first Olympics in Athens. But that's only really in a chronological sense. When you look closely at it, it was a very small affair. Not to the Greeks, it was big to the Greeks, but it was very small elsewhere. There are only 241 competitors, no women, and only 6 from Britain. Famously, one man came along and just wanted to play tennis and joined in and ended up winning a medal just because he wanted to get a court. So it's not exactly anything comparable to what we would see as modernity in modern sport. When we go on from that, as perhaps you know, 1900 in Paris, that was a very minor affair. It was spread over 2 or 3 months. They had a discus competition in the Bois de Boulogne where the discus kept bouncing off the trees when they tried to throw it. Coubertin himself said it was a mess. And 1904 in St. Louis was, if you were, even worse in a sense. It was a farce, Coubertin said. Virtually no one came apart from Americans. So, and each of those Olympics was tied on and just as a very minor addition to a much bigger international event. The Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1900 and the World's Trade Fair. Well, I'm sure that Martin, who was an expert on this, has told you that about 1908, how Britain came in and rescued the games when the Italians pulled out. They built a special stadium, the White City. There were big crowds and good press coverage, and it has a case for certainly being more modern, establishing the Olympics as a kind of permanent fixture in the international sporting scene. But that again was part of a bigger event. It was part of something called the Franco-British Exhibition, which celebrated the entente between France and Britain in the face of a resurgent Germany. And it wasn't a standalone event. The first one, standalone, was Stockholm 1912, which was a success. But then, as Martin mentioned, the First World War came along and blew the whole thing apart. And would the Olympics survive? And how would it meet? How would the Olympic movement meet the challenge of the post-war world, the challenge of democracy, the challenge of communism and the new Soviet state, the challenge of feminism, which became a hugely important feature, political emancipation of women in Britain after 1918. And particularly, how would it face the sort of challenge of football, which suddenly had become, by the early 1920s, the most popular team game in the world, and of course was represented by FIFA, would the IOC be sort of pushed aside by a sort of resurgent FIFA? Those were the kinds of questions that cropped up for the 1924 games. So I want to look at 3 elements of modernity, and then I want to contrast it with 3 elements of tradition and see what you think. You make your mind up where 1924 sits. Was it old? Was it new? The 3 elements of modernity I want to look at are globalism, media and celebrity as a kind of single category, and science. And the 3 elements of tradition are classicism, amateurism, and attitudes to gender. For globalism, let's start with the opening ceremony of 1924. Now, by the standards of opening ceremonies of more recent Olympic Games, this is still quite small scale. But it wasn't by the standards of the time. 1924 had over 3,000 competitors. It was the largest games to date. It included 44 nations. Only Germany was still formally excluded because of continuing problems between France and Germany over the settlement of the First World War. The Soviet Union excluded itself because the Olympics was imperialist, militarist, nationalist, and generally bourgeois, and they didn't want to be associated with it. But apart from that, there were small contingents from India, there was Japan, and particularly there was South America. That was very important because of football. And there were 600,000 spectators that attended in total the 1924 Games. And 200,000 of those attended the football competition, which was the world's leading international football competition at the time. And that competition was won by Uruguay, a country with a population half the size of Paris. It got big crowds and it had really extremely successful competition. The Uruguay team won and they went back to a splendid reception in Montevideo. A massive crowd met them on their return. And in particular, the star of the team is the black player at the back who was called Jose Andrade, and probably, arguably, one of the world's first globally known footballers, a brilliant midfield player who was a key member of the team. Uruguay went on to win in 1928 Olympics football, and it's no coincidence that FIFA decided to create a World Cup and hold it in Uruguay in 1930. In order to stop the Olympics taking over football as part of their international remit. So 1924 is very interesting in terms of this global reach. I think that, yeah, I mean, so there's globalism and there's particularly the sort of embracing of football as part of the tournament. That's something which is quite distinctively, I think, new at the time, certainly in terms of the attention that it got. And this takes us on to our next element, which is what I've called modernity, which I've called sort of media stroke celebrity. The Paris Olympics was the first games to be filmed in its entirety. There is a 3-hour film, which I think the IOC have actually now kind of remade, which you can watch of the entire games, in which they covered all, I think, 20, 22, 23 disciplines. There was also a 35-minute film of the Winter Olympics in Chamonix. And the 1924 games are also the first games where there was both a summer and a winter games. In particular, what's particularly interesting about this is, of course, that it coincides with the huge growth of the cinema as the most quintessentially modern cultural form. There were cinemas everywhere in Western society and urban society by the 1920s. It was still the era of silent film, but film was hugely important. And clips from the Olympics were shown on newsreels. So you would go to the cinema and you'd see 2 or 3 minutes of key events. And this made individuals, the individual champions of the Olympics, into global figures, which they'd never been before. So you can argue the most famous of them is, one of the most famous of them is this man, Johnny Weissmuller. a triple gold medalist in swimming, and Californian, tall, tanned, handsome, who then became, later on, after he made his fame as an Olympian, a film star as Tarzan. Tarzan was one of the key figures of the 1930s cinema, and would be seen as problematic in some ways now, but was hugely successful. Weissmuller made a lot of money out of it, and he's a really interesting example of the sportsman who turns into a media celebrity. He wasn't the only one. And it wasn't restricted to men. The Gertrude Ederle, Queen of the Waves, was a double gold medalist in 24 as a swimmer. And she then went on to be the first woman who swam the English Channel. And that's, you're seeing her received back in the United States in a kind of ticker tape parade celebrating her. But it was the 24 Olympics that launched her. And a film was made about her called Swim Girl Swim. And some of you may even know that there's a film appeared last year called Young Woman and the Sea, which is about Gertrude Ederle and her achievements. It wasn't just Gertrude Ederle. The other great female celebrity of the 24 Games, some people think the greatest tennis player of all time, was Helen Wills, the young Californian who won the ladies singles and doubles. Suzanne Lenglen, the other famous female tennis player, the French tennis player, was injured for that, so they couldn't play out a final against each other. But Helen Wills became a hugely famous figure in sport in the 1920s and 30s. She played 180 games and consecutively as the winner. She won 180 games in a row from 1926 to 1933, and played right throughout the 1930s, but was launched in 1924. So we've got globalism and media. Another athlete I should perhaps mention, particularly in relation to Martin's paper, was the first Black American to be a gold medalist, one of the outstanding athletes, William Hubbard. And his running shoes are in the Fitzwilliam Museum exhibition that's on at Cambridge until Sunday, and then it's finished. And of course, he was the first of these extraordinary Black American athletes that have dominated Olympic sport in the 20th century, from Jesse Owens in the 1936 Games onwards, right up to the present day. So the third element of modernity I want to talk about is sports science, and moving away from the reception of the games and the mediatization of it to the actual athlete's body itself and the transformation of that. 24, I think, is different to previous Olympics in the way that a kind of new science of athletic training was brought to bear. And again, this is something that we talked about in the Fitzwilliam exhibition. The most famous athlete of all 24 was this man, Paavo Nurmi, the Flying Finn, as he was called. And the Finnish came second in the whole medal table for such a small and new nation. And they had perfected a form of scientific preparation for athletes to push the human body further than people thought that it could go, and in a sense medicalize and scientificize performance. He won the 1500 meters, and then the 5000 meters, we see him winning here, and he won them within 1 hour of each other. He won the 1500, took a rest, went out and ran the 5000. He wanted to run the 10,000 because he was the world record holder at that distance. And his Finnish team refused to let him because they thought he was winning too many things. So he wasn't actually a freak of nature, Nomi. He was just a new kind of, human machine. And that was an interesting feature also of the wider perception of 1924. Here's Harold Abrahams, the British athlete who copied very much the same kind of techniques that the Finns used, had a professional coach, Sam Mussolini, that has already been mentioned, and of course is the subject of the Oscar-winning film Chariots of Fire, which appeared in 1981, and which is still the only Oscar-winning film about Olympic sport. A little bit more of that later. So Abrahams was a dedicated athlete who believed in scientific preparation, and whose brother was actually the founder of modern sports medicine. I'm looking at Neil Carter here and referring to his book on the history of sports medicine. So this was very different from the old amateur idea of, well, just turn up and take your coat off and run for fun. They didn't believe in. Abrahams didn't believe in that. Other members of the British team felt differently. The final bit I want to show you here is a picture of, this is the 1500 meters with Nomi. Nomi is, we think, in the figure in blue. It's not clear. It's painted by Robert Delaunay, who was one of the most famous modernist pictures, famous modernists of the 1920s. And I think what's interesting about this to me when I looked at it in the exhibition was that what he sees in this picture is not particularly an individual athlete, but he sees the group as a kind of collective machine that are driving themselves around the track at an enormous, at a huge speed in relation to normal human performance. So that is a certain, and here's a modern artist who is absolutely interested in sport as an example of modernity. And of course, there are other the Italian modernists and so forth that did exactly the same with cycling. It was the era of motor racing, air races and so forth. Speed was of the essence in the 1920s. Now, I've gone over. I'll now go and just say 3 reasons why I think it could be conceived as not so modern. I mean, one is simply the kind of idea of classicism. Pierre de Coubertin believed in the Greek ideal. He believed in the fusion of body and mind. He believed that the Olympic Games was part of a wider culture, and there were gold medals for sculpture, music, painting, poetry. And they were considered as the body and the achievement in sport was seen as part of a wider reimagining of a Greek ideal, what we call Hellenism. Also, I think that leads us into the idea of 1924 as still being a purely amateur event, that the culture was, with the exception of a few of the Finns and Abrahams, to do this for its own sake, to run for pleasure, not to run, and certainly not to run for your own individual glory and so forth. And that takes us to another figure who was the other co-star, if you like, in Chariots of Fire, the Scotsman Eric Liddell. And I live in Edinburgh. Eric came from Edinburgh. There was a whole centenary celebration of Eric Liddell this year in Scotland, a special service in the Edinburgh Cathedral, because Liddell ran for, he said, God made me fast. And he was a committed Christian who then remarkably, he refused to run the 100 meters because it was held on a Sunday. So he ran the 400 meters and he won the 400 meters in a record time. And then he announced after the games, he would simply walk away and become a Christian missionary in China at his height. And here we're seeing a week after winning in the old college of Edinburgh University, being carried around by his fellow students with the laurel wreath around his head, exactly as Coubertin would have desired. And I think more widely you could say that that kind of ideal was still very strong in 1924. For all the emphasis on media and on celebrity and so forth, and science, that you would just run for the hell of it and run for your team and enjoy it. Sport was for fun, and that ethic was still strong at the time. So that balances it. So there you are. You can have it one way or the other. I mean, you decide. I mean, there are some elements of modernity. There are some elements of tradition. You decide, and in doing so, you can use exactly these qualities of judgment, of evidence, analysis, which we want to encourage in the teaching of the FIFA Master first module in Humanities and History. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much. So, question, Steve? Yeah, it's a while since I looked at these things, Dick. I know that one of the great tensions in Olympic history was over amateurism. And thinking about Nurmi, I believe there were attempts to discredit him, weren't there? Over expenses, yeah. And if so, wouldn't that feed into the tension over amateurism, attempt to discredit him because he was dabbling too much in science?
Yeah, I mean, he ran in 24 and 28, and then he wanted to run in 32, but he was not permitted to, because I forget the actual details. I don't know if you can remember, Mike. Or you can remember, Martin. He was disqualified for having sort of contravened, for taking some money or being seen as a professional athlete. And I think it's interesting. There really is this tension in British amateurism between the Abraham's ideal of taking it more seriously, but still remaining amateur, and the kind of old gentlemanly public school ideal of just taking part for the fun of it. And actually, rather surprisingly, it was that second ideal that tended to dominate British athletics, sort of right up until the 1960s and 70s. The 1924 was the best Britain did in the Olympic Games until the 21st century. They never had a successful games. They won 35 medals. And Cambridge University won 11 out of the 35 medals. So if Cambridge University had been a country, it would have come 8th in the medal table of the 1924 Olympics. And clearly within Cambridge, some of you that have seen Chariots of Fire will recall that brilliant scene where Abrahams is sort of questioned by the two heads of college about whether he's a real amateur or not. And he says, of course, I'm not a professional. I don't take money for this. And they say, no, it's not about that. It's about the spirit of amateurism. You want to win for your own personal glory. You should be doing it to be part of the team. And that ideal continued, I think, in British athletics for a long time, and frustrated serious athletes who wanted to get some kind of support for their competition, right until the 1960s, I would say, at least. Although Martin, I'm looking at Martin because he's written extensively about this.
Okay, so,
Yes, thank you very much. When you were speaking about the non-modern Olympics up to 24, you didn't mention 1920.
No.
Was it because it was kind of an Allied Forces event or something?
Right. Well, I did because of time alone. There's a particular story of it, as far as I'm concerned, because I worked as a research fellow in the University of Leuven in Belgium for 3 years, and one of my jobs was to translate a book about the 1924 Olympics about the 1920 Olympics into English. So I did know about that. But yes, I think the 1920s, the 20 Olympics is fascinating, but it's a very makeshift event which takes place very quickly after the war. All of the former combatants of the Central Powers were excluded. So not just Germany, but Austria and other Turkey and the Ottoman countries and so forth. So it didn't attract the same kind of attention, and it didn't have the same scale that 1924 had. It's a fascinating event in its own right, and it was really rather remarkable that it was put on at all. But it didn't, I think, it doesn't really compare in its scale with 1924.
One final quick question from James.
Hi there, at the back here. So I don't even know if there was an organising committee in 1924, but if there was, or was there a conscious effort by them to modernise that particular Olympics, or did it sort of happen by accident with various little things coming together?
Well, so that's a really good question. I mean, no, I think there was an organising committee. I mean, Coubertin it was the last Olympics where he was president. So he founded the Olympics in 1994 in the Sorbonne, and it's 30 years, and then he retired after 1924. So there was an organizing committee. They didn't specifically try to promote a sort of modernism. Much more, I think, they were interested in preserving the kind of classicism of the games, particularly Coubertin. And of course, Coubertin was strongly, and I didn't get around to this point, the last point about tradition. I mean, this was, in modern terms, hugely problematic and patriarchal. I mean, for all the fact of Gertrude Ederle and Helen Wills and a few others, there were 165 women and 3,000 men. And Coubertin did not believe women should be there at all. He said women's participation was unaesthetic and incorrect. The terms he used. But he was a 19th century aristocrat who had a certain sort of notion of gender relations. So no, they didn't deliberately modernize it. What you see are the wider historical forces of the 1920s coming together in terms of internationalism, media, and so forth, science, to create something different that pushed against the previous way of kind of understanding Olympic sport.
Thanks very much. I think we'll have to leave it to wait to debate whether there are other Olympics which might be the first one.
Yes.
1932, I suggest.
36, unfortunately. So that's the case, yeah.
Anyway, thanks very much. So I'm delighted to, for the final of our academic papers, to introduce Heather Dicter. Heather, as I'm sure you all know, is a leading expert on the history of the Olympics and a diplomatic historian. Her edited books have included Soccer Diplomacy and Berlin Sports, which is just out to buy.
Yeah.
And her book on bidding for the 1968 Olympic Games won the Lord Aberdare Literary Prize for the British Society of Sports History Best Book of 2022. And today she's talking about, after Denver, how Innsbruck became the host of the 1976 Olympic Winter Games.
Thank you, Matt. So instead of talking about the games themselves, I'm going to turn to the bidding process. And I'd like to say I bring us a bit more closer to the present, although I am still going to talk about things from more than 50 years ago. And in 16 months, Innsbruck will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the second time it hosted the Olympic Winter Games. And the city is planning commemorative activities, including a book with scholarly contributions on a variety of aspects from the event. And so what I'm going to talk about is part of the research that I've been doing with my colleague Sarah Tietzel from the University of Manitoba in Canada for this upcoming book. And I just wanted to note that while references to the region that hosted the 1960 Winter Olympics still remain within Olympic scholarship, in 2021, that resort that hosted the Olympics officially changed its name to Palisades Tahoe in recognition that the former name is a sexist and anti-Indigenous racial slur. And so accordingly, I will refer to the host city of the 1960 Winter Olympics as the Lake Tahoe region, and have blacked out the word from newspaper images that you'll see during the presentation. Now, for the 1976 Olympic Winter Games, the International Olympic Committee had originally considered bids from Denver in the United States, Sion in Switzerland, Tampere in Finland, and Vancouver Garibaldi in Canada. And they ultimately selected Denver in May 1970. However, on November 7th, 1972, Colorado voters rejected the funding required for the 1976 Olympic Winter Games. The organizers then had no choice but to return the games to the IOC because they did not have the financial ability to construct the facilities needed for the Olympics. Now, Adam Berg's recent book, which you can see pictured here, The Olympics That Never Happened, details that campaign against the Denver Olympics, which included environmental activists, groups concerned about the impact on the city's low-income and minority populations, and residents from various localities who did not want the venues near them, what in environmental studies is called NIMBYism, for not in my backyard. Now, a few days before the election, when funding for the Olympics was on the Colorado ballot, the speculation about what would happen began in the newspapers. With polls predicting voters would reject funding the games, other potential host cities started to mull the possibility of taking the games from Denver. And the day after the election, the competition to host the 1976 Olympic Winter Games began anew, with other American cities as well as locations in Canada and across Europe indicating a willingness to take Denver's place. Any place interested in hosting the Winter Olympics in 1976 now had 2 months to notify, to make that decision and notify the IOC of their candidacy. And only 1 month after that, so in total 3 months after the Denver referendum, the IOC would then select a new host. Potential candidates had to work quickly, which led to some drama in the effort to replace Denver as the host of the 1976 Olympic Winter Games. The media covered this process extensively and particularly highlighted the financial costs and the facilities needed to host the games in such a short time. Now, in 1970, the IOC had selected Denver over 3 other cities after 3 rounds of voting. Initially following Denver's withdrawal, interest from the original competitors seemed high to take Denver's place. Both Vancouver Garibaldi in Canada, which had had the fewest votes leading it to its elimination after the first round of voting, and Tampere, Finland, which had left after the second round of voting, threw their hats back into the ring fairly quickly. Sion, Switzerland, which had had more votes than Denver in the second round of voting, but ultimately lost 39-30 in the third and final round, was occasionally mentioned as a potential replacement. The International Ski Federation president, Mark Hodler, was quick to comment that he expected the IOC to offer the 1976 Winter Olympics to those towns which had lost the vote to Denver, he claimed the IOC president's personal opinion was that the towns defeated in the vote of the IOC should now be offered the chance to stage them again. In the end, the organizers of the Sion bid did not enter the race to replace Denver. And the IOC had required cities, with the support of their National Olympic Committee, to formally apply as a replacement candidate by January 15, 1973. Now, in Canada, media coverage of the Denver referendum's outcome led to immediate speculation about the potential to revive the defeated Vancouver Garibaldi bid. Vancouver's mayor believed the city's odds of success of being selected to host the 76 Winter Olympics were good because of the high quality of the first presentation submitted to the IOC. He noted, the bids from the other cities weren't a patch on what we submitted. The Vancouver Sun's coverage immediately after Denver's withdrawal noted on November 8th, so the day after the election, that Sion was likely the leading candidate city, followed closely by Vancouver. But then the next day included a short story reporting that Innsbruck had emerged as the favored replacement host city. Just 2 days after the election in Colorado, concerns about the cost of hosting the 1976 Winter Games in fact dominated Canadian press. The initial excitement in the Vancouver area as a whole at the prospect of a second chance to secure the right to host the 76 Winter Games was rapidly replaced by practical considerations. The American press focused extensively on potential domestic replacements. The two previous U.S. Olympic winter hosts, Lake Tahoe region in California and Lake Placid in New York, received substantial coverage, particularly by papers in each region, which focused on a potential return of the Games to each of the former Olympic winter host cities. On Election Day in November 1972, the San Francisco Examiner published an article about the Lake Tahoe region's eye on the Olympic vote. The paper's sports writer started the article with a quotation from the spokesperson from the 1960 Olympic venue complex, stating that if Denver turned down the Olympics, the Lake Tahoe region definitely would be interested in staging the Games. After continuing with the discussion of Lake Placid's potential, the article ended with a focus on Innsbruck. The article noted that a Denver Olympic Organizing Committee official had stated that he thought Innsbruck, Austria, site of the 1964 Winter Olympics, would be the most logical candidate because it had almost all the facilities and even has done some preliminary planning. A similar split continued the day after the election as the topic dominated the front page of the paper's sports section. One article was written by one of the local reporters, and focused on the views of the local officials next to a map of the area with where all of the Olympic facilities might be listed, and called this the 76 Games Plan. Yet at the top of the page, just above this article, was a wire service story titled "An Olympiad Up for Grabs," which considered potential replacement host cities more broadly and had included that quotation from the International Ski Federation president. Now, the United States Olympic Committee had set a deadline of December 26th, because that's not a holiday in the US, and for American cities to express their interest in being the US candidate to replace Denver. The USOC met on January 3rd and 4th in New York City, and their first order of business on their second day of the meeting was the selection of Denver's replacement. The USOC had 4 candidates: Lake Placid, New York, host of the 1932 Winter Olympics; Salt Lake City, Utah; and 2 separate bids from the Lake Tahoe region, which had hosted the 1960 Winter Olympics. The Lake Tahoe region actually had a difficult time putting together their bid. California Governor Ronald Reagan refused to support a bid financially because the state already had to continue funding, making financial contributions to maintain the facilities from the 1960 Games. And so in the month after Denver's referendum, the Reno Gazette-Journal frequently covered this topic on the front page and the difficulties confronting the local politicians in preparing a bid. Not only did they have to support the 1976 Winter Olympics, both in spirit and money, but they had a really short time to do so. Various local groups could not come to an agreement regarding their support, which meant they actually had 2 separate bids that presented their case to the U.S. Olympic Committee. One group was considered Lake Tahoe/Reno, so Reno, Nevada, and the other represented North Lake Tahoe, which included many of the sites from the 1960 Olympics. But they actually had both planned many of the sporting events to take place in the same venues and largely just differed in where the skiing events would take place. As I'm sure you can imagine, this did not really help their bids. And so after listening to all the presentations from all 4 candidates and then having a lengthy private discussion, the United States Olympic Committee voted to select Salt Lake City as their replacement candidate, and they duly notified the International Olympic Committee by the January 15th deadline. By the end of the month, however, Salt Lake City withdrew its bid. Utah senators had informed the bid committee that federal funding was not guaranteed, and it would not be possible to receive any kind of financial commitment before the IOC selected Denver's replacement. In addition, the Salt Lake Tribune had been reporting about local backlash to the bid based on environmental concerns. And with these stories appearing actually alongside the announcement that the city had won the USOC's decision, so right from the beginning. Salt Lake City thus had many of the same financial and environmental concerns that Denver had, which forced the Salt Lake City mayor to send a telegram to the United States Olympic Committee on January 30th, withdrawing the city from consideration. With the IOC selecting a new host of the 1976 Winter Olympics on February 4th, the United States appeared to be without a candidate to be able to organize the Winter Olympics during the country's bicentennial year. But not wanting that to be the case, the United States Olympic Committee immediately contacted the Lake Placid bid and asked, were they still interested in organizing the Olympics in 1976? And when the Lake Placid organizers responded positively and yes, confirmed that the New York Village was willing to bid for the 1976 Winter Olympics, the United States Olympic Committee then confirmed to the International Olympic Committee that Lake Placid would be their candidate. They didn't really know if that was going to be the case, but IOC President Lord Callanan personally agreed to allow Lake Placid to enter their very late bid for consideration by the IOC's executive board just a few days later. So the Lake Placid mayor and 4 other members of the delegation immediately left Lake Placid for Lausanne. And when the mayor left, he was quoted by the newspaper and emphasized that Lake Placid actually had the only bobsled track in the country. And this is why their bid required far less money than Denver had needed. Nonetheless, in those few days between Salt Lake City's withdrawal and the IOC's acceptance of Lake Placid as a U.S. replacement, when only 3 European candidates remained, the press on both sides of the Atlantic argued it was only really a contest between Innsbruck in Austria and Chamonix-Mont-Blanc in France. These 2 potential hosts were considered favorites because the cost of returning there would be lower than that of building new installations at short notice in Tampere. Even though France had hosted the Olympic Winter Games more recently in 1968, although that was in Grenoble and not in Chamonix-Mont-Blanc, than Innsbruck, who had last hosted in 1964, news stories considered Innsbruck the favorite. Innsbruck, in fact, had been the early frontrunner to replace Denver. The headline in The Guardian here in the UK, just days after the Denver referendum, proclaimed, Austria may rescue the IOC. The paper's assessment of the potential replacements for Denver was practical from a cost and facility standpoint, noting that Innsbruck's proposal would reuse the 1964 facilities and cost only £7.4 million. British sports writer John Samuel, writing in The Guardian, highlighted Innsbruck's successful staging of the 1964 games, while Chamonix's bid was spread out over 16 locations, and Tampere had not even offered to stage the alpine skiing, the bobsled, or luge. On the eve of the IOC Executive Board's decision in February 1973, the Miami Herald wrote that Innsbruck was thought to have the inside track on hosting the games it staged only 9 years ago, because the existing facilities there mean costs will be lower than elsewhere. With Colorado residents voting not to use tax dollars to fund the Olympics, and Salt Lake City's replacement bid also ending because of the lack of funding, along with reports that the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich the previous year had run to $500 million, the idea of a reduced cost for Innsbruck was emphasized repeatedly in the press. And on February 4th, 1973, the 4 candidates made their presentations to the IOC Executive Board. After their presentations, all 5 winter sport federations then shared their opinions on the candidate cities. The Los Angeles Times reported that all 5 favored Innsbruck. The IOC Executive Board then voted and, in fact, selected Innsbruck as Denver's replacement. Upon winning the 1976 Olympic Winter Games, the Innsbruck mayor said the city intended to keep the Olympic Games simple, in tune with the IOC's strong wish to see the Olympics become a less gigantic and extravagant. He also claimed the Games would cost about 500 million shillings, which is about £9.5 million at the time, and about half of that would be spent on the construction of an Olympic village, the only new facility that needed to be built. After Innsbruck's selection, the US press wrote about Innsbruck having been the favorite all along, even though before the vote, they had not entirely singled out the Austrian city. The Boston Globe published a wire service article that claimed the choice of Innsbruck had been widely predicted because of the low cost involved in staging the games at short notice in a resort which already has the necessary facilities. Even though much of the Canadian media coverage by this time focused on the costs associated with the 1976 Montreal Summer Olympics, as Canadians were already attuned to the emerging financial risks the Montreal organizers were racking up on behalf of Canadians, and they really had no clue how much money they'd actually end up spending. The papers in Canada also noted Innsbruck's position as the likely replacement host city. The Winnipeg Free Press quoted IOC President Kalanen's remarks that all of the winter sport federations favored Innsbruck, so the decision was expected as a non-event. One Vancouver Sun reporter wrote, "To the great surprise of no one, the 1976 Winter Olympics go to Innsbruck." And in analyzing the IOC's decision, he added, "The smartest move was to play safe and send the games to an area where everyone thinks the Winter Olympics are the greatest invention since money. Innsbruck qualifies because there, or anywhere else in Europe's alpine cockpit, that's exactly what the Winter Games are, money in the bank. The cost will be minimal. The facilities from the 1964 production are still there. All that's needed is a little tidying up, and they'll be all set to go." The Canadian media's reaction to Innsbruck being awarded the Winter Games focused on the frugalness of the plans, and particularly as they contrasted to the concerns about the growing Montreal 1976 Summer Olympic expenses. Now, one of the most common themes across the press coverage of the contest to reallocate the 1976 Olympic Winter Games sounds familiar to the present. Indeed, the discussion of candidate cities foreshadows the more recent ideas advanced in the IOC's Agenda 2020, particularly reusing existing venues instead of building new ones. Many of the 40 recommendations that comprised Agenda 2020 included a focus on sustainability and fiscal responsibility, with the intention of making the bidding process cheaper and more manageable for cities interested in hosting the games. The IOC committed to reviewing favorably bids that reused existing venues to reduce overall building costs and were environmentally conscious. These points, accepted by the IOC in March 2021, were in fact two of the biggest concerns that the press highlighted in the early 1970s with their coverage of the candidates to replace Denver. In the United States, finances played a bigger concern over facilities, although Lake Placid had routinely highlighted that it did have facilities for all of the events. Broader press coverage across the English-speaking countries emphasized facilities and costs in the arguments for Innsbruck's selection. This deeper examination of an earlier crisis point in the Olympic movement demonstrates that the challenges which have plagued the IOC in more recent years have in fact been long-standing issues. The IOC and the Guardian sports writer in 1972 considered Austria as saving the Olympics. Yet the solution to that problem was returning the Olympic Games to previous hosts with existing facilities, an idea that the IOC has only taken far more seriously with its recent adoption of Agenda 2020. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes for questions. Got any questions? Chris?
Thanks, Heather, for such an interesting presentation, which made me think. I was sort of covered in your presentation, but it's on bidding for Olympics. Do you think the IOC is ready to make hosting of the Olympics global? Because if you look at other sports, be it cricket, football, no, they've been hosted in Africa, in other Middle East, in continents or places where maybe the Olympics not ready yet. But do you think that the Olympics can, because for me, I might be wrong here, there's an elitism in it, that to host in other parts of the world can be extremely expensive. And is there genuineness in the IOC to make it global?
I would say that by the IOC trying to elevate the hosting of the Youth Olympic Games to the same kind of process of allocating the Summer and Winter Olympic Games, and that they see that as a way to bring the Olympics, albeit the youth version, to other parts of the world where they really don't have the ability to host the Summer Olympics and the Winter Olympics, but because the Youth Olympic Games are smaller, and that they have been trying to spread those to different parts of the world. And the IOC tries to see, is really trying to make the Youth Olympic Games as being not quite on equal par with the Summer and Winter Olympics, but that allocation of them trying to show that it can be global, but recognizing that some places really just are not going to be able to host the two flagship events.
I've written a question down and your final slide came up, which kind of changed it a bit. But I was really struck that in the 1970s, the conversation is going on about gigantism and extravagance. And now we're here 50 years later. What went wrong in between?
Why are we still having these conversations? Yeah. I don't know, maybe
Montreal.
Yeah, Montreal kind of made things take that nosedive, but then LA saved the games. But I feel like maybe there's a long-standing IOC member you might be able to ask those questions to instead of me for the IOC's views on that topic. But I do think, it's going back and reading the media and Sarah and I were just struck at how it's the same comments, it's the same thing. And whereas, it seems like these are new issues, and in fact, it's not. And considering, this reallocation after Denver, because there was talk about just killing the Winter Olympics as a whole. Avery Brundage never liked the Winter Olympics, and he died in 1975, so right before Innsbruck got to host them. And there was a bit of discussion as to, even amongst some of the IOC members, well, Denver's giving them back, let's just end the Winter Games now. And they reallocate to Innsbruck, and Kalanen had made some remarks he kind of wanted to see. Maybe we can hold off allocating 1980s Winter Games until after Innsbruck to see if they're going to still happen. But they realized that wasn't really fair to give whoever was going to host 1980 less than 4 years. But then, so that sentiment really changes with how the 76 games happen in Innsbruck.
What a question. You can tell me if I'm ignorant, but it seems like this is a crisis period in terms of hosting the Olympic Games. So is this the first period where really what you get in those in the trials and newspapers and stuff, that kind of recent hosting is becoming key advantage here, and having those facilities, and is that the first time that's really been a factor in terms of the Winter Olympics?
I think so. I can kind of make 1948 a bit of an exception to things, just in thinking on, the world having just had the war. And so, this is then really the first time that the Winter Games are given to a host city for the second time. And they really are emphasizing, all of the discussion about Innsbruck is constant, they have everything, you just need to give it some sprucing, some upgrades. But they have all the existing facilities, whereas, so even after that, so much of the conversation is we're going to build a ski jump, because it's not to replace the one we have, it's because we don't have one, and nobody has a sliding track, basically, and having to cut new alpine tracks and biathlon tracks, cross-country tracks. So yeah, it really is the first time they're really talking about, we have all the existing facilities for these sports that, people have stadiums, people might have a velodrome, they might not, But for the winter events, most places don't just have those hanging out.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to Heather.
Thanks very much, Matt. Thanks, Dick and Heather. Wonderful stuff. Okay, we're going to have a very short break now, 15 minutes. Then we come back, we'll be moving into the alumni in conversation and Q&A session. Okay, so back in here for 4 o'clock, please. Then when we finish at 5, there'll be a wine and soft drink think we're all back. That's good. And welcome some new people who weren't here earlier on. So in a moment we're going to move into the in conversation alumni spot. But first off, and Danielle's running away from me. Okay, well first off, in the classic tradition, a word from our sponsor. DMU for Life is very generously funding the reception that you'll enjoy in about an hour's time. And they are running a wonderful sport project. So Danny, who I know the FIFA Master students have met before, some of you may as well, is going to have a quick word about that.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for having me here today. So my name is Danielle Wright. I'm the Alumni Engagement Manager at Montfort University, and I work in the Development and Alumni Engagement team. So we support alumni for our team, but we also do a lot of work to support our current students who, not all of them, can access all of the opportunities that are available at De Montfort University. So we work to create opportunity funds and work with professionals and those in business that want to give back and support our students through time, through money, through scholarships, through funding. And I wanted to take the opportunity today just to highlight our DMU Sport Opportunities Fund. So as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, being part of a sporting club or team, it can be one of the most important and memorable experiences at university. So just to look at there's lots more information on this page. But many students from DMU, we are a widening participation university, and they do come from low income backgrounds, which we're very proud to be part of in supporting these students. But sometimes they're not able to play in their chosen sport because they haven't got the funds available for basic things like a sports bra or the right shoes for football or the elite level equipment. So I just want to highlight this fund to the audience of the event today. And if there is any way that you can contribute to this fund, but more crucially, you guys have lots and lots of contacts. So if you know anybody that can support us with this work, then please do let us know. Fundraising manager Thomas Weir, he heads up our Opportunities Fund, and he'd be really interested to speak to anyone that would like to discuss how they can support our students in DMU Sport. And that's everything.
That's brilliant.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank
guys.
you. Thanks. It's great. Excellent. Thank you very much. So, as a celebration of the FIFA Master, we wanted obviously to showcase some of the historical research we do, but very much we also want to showcase the alumni. And we're so privileged to be able to welcome our alumni guest, Primrose Munduru from Zimbabwe, who was a student on the 16th edition. I think that was my second year of being here, so I was probably felt like a bit of an old hand when you came on, Primrose, but I had the great pleasure of teaching Primrose and her class. Primrose is from Zimbabwe, and her career has taken her from the Zimbabwe Olympic Committee through the FIFA Master, then on to roles at the International Paralympic Committee, and for the last 4 years as the Gender Equality and Inclusion Manager for the International Olympic Committee. So while we've been talking about Olympic history, it's wonderful to welcome somebody from the IOC from Lausanne here now. And she's come all the way from Lausanne just to be with us today. The format for this is we're going to have a bit of a chat about her journey and her current work in promoting equality and inclusion within the Olympic movement and at host cities. We've got a rough running order that we kind of worked out over lunch. Chat for 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so, and we'll move over to questions from the floor. If you see James Panter waving at me, it means that the first section is over and moving into the second. Oh, not so soon, James. So if you do have questions, jot them down, and then we'll have a full Q&A at the end. And obviously, Primrose will also be here during the reception, so if any of you want to chat to her individually, then it's great for you to do so. So Primrose, fantastic to see you. It's a few years since we met. And I think a starting point for any journey, of course, is you growing up and your relationship with sport. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you first got into sport as a kid, as a young person in Zimbabwe?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and brings memories of when I was sitting right where you're sitting today. Being a FIFA Master student, an incredible journey that, it's part of my story, it's part of my journey. As Martin has said, I grew up in Zimbabwe and sport was or is not part of our culture. in our day-to-day homes, our focus as a girl child is taking care of the house, my siblings, being academic, pass your school, and then go to uni and get a job. So that's the kind of upbringing that I had. And in school, because in Zimbabwe, sport is practiced in school, not in clubs. So in school, I remember in high school, I was 14, and with a few of my friends, we decided to go and play basketball because it was a day that was like a sports open day. You choose a sport to play every Wednesday. Everybody had to play sport. So we decided to go to basketball. But the basketball court was built just behind the boys' hostels. And the three of us went, we were very happy, enthusiastic. We wanted to play our basketball and join the team and learn the sport. But the moment we got there, because the boys were sitting on their windows in the skyscrapers of the hostels, and they started passing comments, and some derogatory stuff. And that was the last time we went back to basketball, because it really impacted how we would interact with sport, because every time we went, the boys are there, they are passing the comments and stuff like this. And then in the end, I ended up going to join netball because it was an all-girls sport. It was on the side of the little corner in the girls' hostel. So that was like my involvement in sport as a young person. So netball is my sport.
Okay, so we could say that issues relating to gender equality and inclusion were hardwired into you from that early experience. So was it always your ambition to work in sport? Because obviously you've got a fantastic career. Was that always an ambition, or was that an accident?
It was an accident, really. I always thought I would end up working in pharmacy, in biology, biochemistry. But at the time that I finished my high school education, I had an uncle who lived in South Africa, and South Africa is more modern in terms of sport and everything, who had exposure in what sport could do. And I had been accepted into one of the universities for biology and another university for sports science, which was a new program which was starting. And of course, I took biology because that's what I knew. And then my uncle said, no, biology is not going to be great. Sport is a growing business. In South Africa, people are making money. And I was like, okay, I want to make money. So I'm going to take it. So I took sports science. In my class was like the first class. So it was kind of like a trial. It wasn't known. And everybody in the university during that time in Zimbabwe was kind of like, who does sport? And when you do sport, in the end, you're going to be a PE teacher. Is that what you want to do? And, it wasn't a thing. Even my friends were like, how does a girl from the sciences class end up in sport? So I then went in sport by accident. So we can continue that journey.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
You certainly showed them with what you've done there.
Yeah.
And then so your first role after graduation was with the Zimbabwe Olympic Committee, is that right?
Yes.
What was your role there?
So when I first joined the NOC in my country, I worked as development officer. And my focus was really on Olympic solidarity development programs, focusing on athletes and coaches. And 2 years in the job, our NOC expanded and we had much more resources. So we grew a whole programs department, and then I became the head of the programs department. So I was responsible to oversee the running of the 29 Olympic Solidarity World Programs, with about 4 people who were working with me. So that's what I focused on. And most of it was really on development focused for athletes, coaches, and also I focused mainly on sports medicine as well, just to give support, and then also Olympic values education programs. So that's what I did in the NOC. And I did that for like 5 years. Yeah. Okay. Until the time I decided.
I was going to say, and then so at that point, the FIFA Master came knocking.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that come about? How did you hear about us? What did you think the FIFA Master would do to help you develop your career?
So I'll take you back a little bit. In 2010, I was selected by the IOC as one of the IOC Young Ambassadors for the Youth Olympic Games, which was the inaugural games in Singapore. And it was like a one-year program whereby we worked on culture and education programs and the history of sport, and just passing this information or knowledge to school-age sport athletes and also young children within the different communities. So we're 25 of us, and we had to so for me, I had my cluster of countries that I talked to about culture and education, which was really nice. I really enjoyed the experience. I really enjoyed being part of the Youth Olympic Games as well. And in 2012, in UK, in London, I came to my first Olympics as part of the team administration. And while I was there, I kind of got like a light bulb moment where I was like, sport is so huge. I could do so much. Why am I just doing this little thing with this little NOC? I can do much more. And it's because also I've been working with the IOC Olympic Solidarity for some time. I was kind of like, okay, I want to explore and see how this can take me. So then I went back home after London with all the, the enthusiasm after an event. And you get home, and then after some months, it dies down. It's just like, okay, I'm back to my reality. But for me, it didn't die down. I was really proactive, and I started looking for opportunities abroad because I was looking at working for international setup. And I started looking at things, I started applying here and there, but it wasn't coordinated, it wasn't well informed. It was just like, oh, I saw something, let me, and also I didn't have the full scope on how things work when it comes to like permits for work, when it comes to, I'm a non-EU person, if I want to work in the European Union, what do I need? So I didn't have all this, So I decided, okay, I think I should start by getting an education from Europe because I wanted to be in Europe. And that year I applied for 3 programs. I applied for the FIFA Master, I applied for the ICSHC, and I applied for some master, I think from Lafra or something. And I was accepted in all the 3. And I had to make a decision at that time, which was a tough decision. First, because I had a full-time job in Zimbabwe in a place where the economy is so bad, and having a job was a big thing. And I looked at the FIFA Master, okay, it's a full-time course. I'm like, okay, I really love it. I've read about the testimonials, I've read the content, I've read about how it's structured. You go from one place to the next, So I was like, okay, this will be difficult. Then I look at the ICSHC, it's also full-time, etc. And the last one. So anyway, in the end, I went for the FIFA Master. I accepted the FIFA Master. I got here in August of 2015. And it changed the way I viewed things. One of the things that the FIFA Master did for me, because I had already been working in sport, so I kind of had an idea on a number of things and a bit of academic. What the FIFA Master gave me was the exposure and the opportunity to see what else I could do. The networking, incredible. The alumni, incredible. The sessions or the way that we learned also was kind of different from how we learned in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, we go to a lecture. The lecturer lectures, you take notes, you go home. Here I learned about critical thinking. I learned, okay, you can challenge, you can bring your own opinions, you can bring your own views, which was really something that was like really life-changing for my learning way or for my academic career. And one of the things that also made me really want to do the program and also experience it while I was at it was when we came here for the first module here at TMU, learning about the history of sport, about where does all of whatever that is happening around you is coming from was critical, because that helped me to be able to think about the future with a full context. Because as you know, sport is not in a vacuum. Sport is part of the world, the global world, and sport is part of the geopolitics. So that helped me to have that full understanding. Okay, if we're talking about Olympics, if the Olympics are held every 4 years, why is that? Is it because they just want to have a breather, then they come back? So it was really, really a great moment for me to really understand fully the sociology side of sport and the history, which was not part of my learning in sport science at all.
That's fantastic. And I think I'm picking up on some remarks Pierre made earlier about how the FIFA alumni bring something extra and make a difference to the organisations they work in. I think that's one of the things we pride ourselves on. That's great. You're a great student. I remember marking your work and enjoying your contributions in class. So then after graduation, with all of that wisdom, that contextual thinking, but also the networks and the practical knowledge, you got a job quite quickly, didn't you? You went to the International Paralympic Committee. Was that straight from graduation, a couple of months?
So it was like 4 months
Right.
after.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you worked in athlete engagement at the IPC. What did that involve? In particular, I'm intrigued by somebody who comes from a non-disability background and a non-disability sport background, what it's like to work with disability sport.
I think the key lesson or the key learning from me having worked at the IPC was really being able to put yourself in the shoes of somebody that you have not experienced, and understanding that yes, you can have academic knowledge, but sometimes it cannot compare to a lived experience. In as much as yes, a lived experience does not translate to expertise, but they complement each other. So that was a key learning for me, to be able to stop and listen and understand, like, what are their needs. So the main job for athlete engagement at the IPC was really to understand what are the needs of the athletes. And coming back to also history and the disability movement, it was important for me to know or to understand why and how was the International Paralympic Committee created. And the use of sport as a way to advance different topics was huge in the Paralympic movement. So having that history and knowing that the people with the disability use the Paralympic Games really to show that they are able, they can do it, they're equally elite athletes, very good athletes, was really important for me to understand that history, because they always reminded at any forum or any platform that these are our games, the games for us, made by us, they have to be made by us. But they also had so much respect for people who didn't have a disability, because, okay, you know your work, you know what you need to do, and you're also empathetic. That was, like, for me, one of the things that I learned throughout the way. It's really giving time to listen. Like, it was key for me to listen. In that job, I think that's one of the key, I don't know if I can call it a skill, but listening, which is not usually, like, a lot of people don't like to listen. I like to talk, but but listening is key, and that was a key, really big learning moment for me. And the fact that the IPC made a decision at their General Assembly that year in 2021 that they needed to have an athlete engagement department, which was new, which I contributed to creating and leading, was also a testimony, or also to say that they are really putting the athletes in the heart of what they're doing. So yeah, it was really great.
Really interesting stuff. You then had a little career break.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So while I was working in that role, then I became pregnant, and I was living in Germany, and I had a little boy who's 3 now. I came with him, actually. Yeah, he's here.
He's not in the building with us.
No,
He's with his auntie.
He's here. Yeah. And in Germany, because the law allows you to take parental leave after 3 years, or you can break it down. So I took 18 months of leave out of work, which was really, really great for me to bond with my baby, and also just to switch off work, because we are always working and it's non-stop. You keep going. So that also gave me a time of reflection on what was important to me as a person, what was important for my career growth, how, like, my priorities changed, of course, because now I had a little person who's looking up to me. So yeah, I took a very long career break in terms of international organizations of sport working. It was a very long break, and I returned to work after 18 months. I worked for a month, and in that month, one of the things that really motherhood did for me was I was very decisive. I was not apologetic. I was like, I didn't have time for BSing, you know what I mean? Yeah, I didn't have time for that. So it was straight to the point. Okay, I do this, I do that. If I can't do it, or I'm not able or willing to do it, then I'm not gonna do it. So then I resigned. And then I started thinking about, okay, what was my real passion and what was my real trajectory of my journey when I came to the FIFA Masters? And I remembered what I wanted to do. And then, yeah, I left.
It was the Olympics that were calling you back. I should have said earlier, by the way, there was a wonderful video of Primrose in that youth ambassador role from 2010. If you look, I think it's on your LinkedIn. actually.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube as well, so you can see her being a wonderful ambassador back in the day. So what you wanted to do then was the Olympics, right? That would be the big draw, that 2012 epiphany moment, light bulb moment. So you amazingly, so the IOC were there and they were ready and waiting for you with a role as gender equality and inclusion manager. I mean, that just sounds tailor-made for you. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So what does it involve? Talk us through it.
So within the IOC, we have one of the departments called Corporate Sustainability and Social Development. This is where my unit sits on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. And in this unit, we are 4 of us, and we focus just on that. And our job or our role is to support, to ensure that IOC as an organization is upholding the principles of gender equality, diversity, and inclusion that are put in place, and that the IOC acts as a role model and a leader of the Olympic movement in this aspect. Second, our role is to support the Olympic movement, which includes the international federations and national Olympic committees on anything gender equality, diversity, and inclusion related. And lastly, the Olympic Games organizing committees. It's also our role to ensure that they embed gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in all of the work that they do. So that's how our streams are worked. And of course, with this kind of work, it's more advocacy, and also the influence that the IOC can have. So we know the games are a huge platform where you can demonstrate or where you can have gender equality. And you may have seen, maybe most of you, if you watched the Paris Olympics or followed the narrative, communications narrative from the IOC for Paris Games, the first ever numeric gender equal games since the inception of the games. So it's taken the IOC 124 years to be able to get here. And what the IOC did to have the equal quota of women and men is to just tell international federations, media rights holders, etc., everybody, okay, we're giving an equal quota of women athletes competing at the games, 50-50. You go and decide how that would look like, but this is the rule. And it worked because IOC owns the games. They have the influence and it works. However, with that incredible number, we have a lot of work to do when you look at other roles. Women are less represented. One example that I can give is coaches who coached at Paris Olympics. Women accounted for only 13% of the coaches.
13%.
Entire.
So 50% on the field.
On the field
13%.
of life, then 13% women. At Tokyo, it was 18%. So nothing has happened in the 4 years. Rio was 11%. So it's really, and it's not just the coach's role. We have like team chef de missions, we have international technical officials, medical staff, where across the board, women are less represented. And this is our drive or our focus for the next 4 years to see what can we do with LA to ensure that we are more inclusive of women, what policies should be put in place. And the thing about it is it's not just an IOC action, it's everybody within the Olympic movement who has to also like do their bit to ensure that we are as inclusive as possible and also supportive of women to be able to access sport. That's where it began. It became supportive of women to be role models that the young girls can see that, okay, I could be this person. But if they don't see any of the women in those roles, it's going to be kind of difficult for them to have the inspiration. And one success story, there were many success stories, but one that I'm also proud of that our team contributed to was the first time ever at the Olympic Games. We partnered with PNG, Pampas Grant, to have a space and nursery for athletes who are parents to bring their children during the day so that they can play there, they can spend time with them, and also like their families, because as athletes, they stay in the Olympic Village, they never have access to their kids who are staying elsewhere. So for the first time we had this, and it was incredible. We had very good and positive feedback from the athletes, and it makes such a huge difference, you know. And it's also the message is to say to the women that, or the men as well, you can be a parent and you can also be an elite athlete. You don't have to choose either of the two, but you can actually do both. So that was, for me, a very nice addition to the games.
That's fantastic. So what does a day in the life in the office look like? I'm sure there's not such thing as a normal day.
Crazy.
What would an average day in the office look like?
Like I said, the ICSHC is a political organization, number one. The work of gender equality, diversity, and inclusion is a lot about advocacy. So in a day, typical day, we are talking. This is what we do, we talk. So meetings, presentations, webinars, you know, it's what we do on a day-to-day. We talk, we have so many meetings. I don't remember ever since I joined the IOC having a day where there's no meeting. It doesn't happen. It's internal, external, and that's just how the work goes. And for me, I'd like also to talk a little bit about work-life balance as a parent. I get to the office around 9:30, and my team is very supportive. They know that I can't do meetings at 8, at 9, because I have to take my son to crèche and then go to the office. And the IOC has they're really understanding, or they've created an environment that allows us to have that work-life balance. And I leave the office, I have to leave at 5 because I have to go and pick up my son. But I also then continue, like if I need to, then I continue to work when I'm at home or whatever. But this flexibility allows me to be able to work, to have a professional job and also be a mom, you know, which probably doesn't happen everywhere. And we also have a policy that we're allowed to work 2 days from home per week, which is also a nice addition. So in addition to the meetings that we have, a lot of them crazy number of talking that we do, we also work a lot now in really thinking ahead on what is the geopolitics, of course, already around us, what's happening in the world. Like I said, sport is not a vacuum. What is the current politics within the sport industry? What is the history of sport in terms of, like, think about, okay, let's introduce women to, one good example. Let's have women compete in the prime time of the Olympic Games other than have men. So when you don't understand the history on why it was done in the first place, it's very difficult for you to come up with solutions or to come up with strategies or ideas. So it's really for us understanding, okay, this is what has been done. Why was it done? How does it work? How does it impact everybody? What is the best way for everybody, like to really be included and be part of the journey? So it's always about, it's talking. I will say, like, at the end, we spend our days talking and thinking and strategizing about how we move forward.
That's fantastic. I've got one more question, then I'm going to open it up. I've got a couple more for the end, but I think we've got a real good sense of things that you're really proud of in your current job. On a personal level, what's the thing in your career and your life that you're most proud of, do you reckon?
I think I would say that I'm most proud about the fact that I didn't look at the fact that I'm coming from Zimbabwe, a tiny little country, and I can do little. I'm proud of the drive that I have. I'm proud of knowing that I can. And I'm proud of the hard work that I have put, you know, because the narrative, well, the real truth or the reality of the matter is, as a non-EU person, it's difficult to work in the EU. That's a fact. But I always had this passion and drive, and I always wanted to do it. And it's the drive, it's the passion in me, like, and what do I call it? The word is not coming to me, but it's the want, or that I can do it, and the belief in myself. Like, okay, this is my passion, this is my dream. I'm not gonna let my dream die just because For me to get to the ILC took me 6 years, but I always knew that I would get there and I'm gonna do it. So I'm really proud of my drive, my passion, and the hard work, and and the choices I've made in life. Because at the time I chose the FIFA Master, it was a full-time job. I went home, I told my mom, my late mom at the time, I said, oh, I'm going to go to the FIFA Master, and I had a fiance at the time. And then, oh, okay, they thought it's like this, you go 1 week, maybe you come back. Then I'm like, it's full-time. Say, you can't leave your job, you can't resign. Because at the end, when you come back, what are you gonna do? There are no jobs, it's difficult. But I was just like, I had the belief, the self-belief, and the conviction in me that if I take this journey, I think I'm gonna make it break. And it happened, and the stars just align, when you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. What I'm going to do now is open up to any questions from the floor. The acoustics in here are pretty good. If I sense your question needs repeating, then I'll do so, but let's go from there. So open up, anyone at all with any questions on any aspect of this?
Yeah, first of all, Thiago from Brazil. First of all, thank you for sharing your story. I think bringing to our scenario as a current class, you mentioned that you had 4 months between the end of the master's and your first job afterwards. So how was those 4 months for you?
First of all, I actually thought I was late in getting a job at that time. But also being pragmatic and like coming back to what I said, I'm not EU. 4 months at the end is like, it's nothing, right? In the bigger scheme of things. So I didn't have a job when I graduated. I was just lucky that my NOC called me to go with them to the Rio Olympics. So it was really nice. But my day-to-day in those 4 months was sitting and looking for a job and talking to people. And saying, oh, hi, I saw that, so I applied, I said to the IPs, I wrote to someone from WADA that I'd worked with before. I said, oh, I saw that you're a connection of Vanessa who is hiring for this job. Could you put in a good word for me? And of course, because I worked well and I had like a good reputation, like of course he did. And so that's what I did. And I even had like an Excel spreadsheet which had a list of all the jobs that I would have seen that would have been of interest to me. And then I would have different columns on like published date I applied, my reply, comments, or if I got feedback why I've not been accepted, interview level, CV level, whatever, I had that. And I was doing it every day diligently and talking to people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Daniel from Peru. I guess like my question is a bit, sports is still kind of like a white male like club, and so sometimes I have this nervousness of like, is it just going to be exhausting to like exist in that kind of industry, because I come from a very female dominated one. So I wonder what your experience is with that.
I'm here. Of course, it's it's male dominated. This is what I'll say. And depending on which part you're in, like when the ICSHC is in Switzerland, the Swiss population is largely white. So we have to look at it from all those angles. If you get a job at CAF, which is in Africa, the large majority of the population is black. So you're gonna have that population mostly in everywhere else, so it's not just like an isolation. But what I will say is, even if it's a male-dominated industry, if you still have the drive, the will, and also understanding the politics around where you are, is very important. Because there are things or places or positions that you would know, okay, this one I will not even be considered, right? So you wouldn't waste your time with that. And talking to people, like I've said, it really helps a lot, because there are really good male allies. It doesn't have to always be a woman who's your mentor or a woman who's going to support your next career move or whatever. They're also great men allies that you can also rely on, like, oh, okay, you are the leaders, I want to get into this, what kind of advice you can give me, so there are a lot of different strategies that you can do also to get to where you want to be. Yeah.
I've got Tristan first. Yeah, okay, Tristan first.
Yeah, in your work with para athletes, I was curious what was your greatest challenge working with them, and as well as creating and growing a brand, but also the greatest opportunity you see for that growth.
Of course, the number one challenge was always me not being a disabled person, visible disability, I think, person, and being able to convince them to say that I'm here for your interests. I support you, I hear you, I want to push the needle forward, let's work together, and really listen to them with interest. And that challenge was there initially in the beginning. In fact, when I was hired, the Athletes Council of the IPC wasn't happy because they had not been part of the process, but it's a management issue. It's not like just athletes and stuff. But in the end, because I was doing a great job, they had so much respect for me, and by the time I left, I'd made so many friends with the para athlete community, which is incredible. There are a lot of opportunities for para sport. I think, if I recall well, I saw on social media that for Paris, Paris, first of all, the tickets from the Olympic Games, I think this is the highest tickets they've sold for the first time, and they filled out all the stadiums. They had high broadcast views, etc. So the Paralympics, for sure, they are growing. And you can see the brand is now visible. They do quite a lot. So there is a lot of opportunity. And it's also what do you call this? It's not an industry, but it's also a space you can explore, para sport, because it's growing. There's a lot that they still need to grow on, that you will still need to catch up with the Olympics. So there is opportunity there, which you can look at. And they have everything, even in Olympics, they have anti-doping, they have classification, which is an interesting and incredible topic. So there's so much you can look at. And don't close yourself always to just think, okay, this is, I'm here for the FIFA Master, I want to go and work for FIFA. Yeah.
Very good. It's Joshua, I think.
All right, my name is Joshua from Nigeria. Considering your experience and where you're coming from, what strategic plan do you have to help the girl child from the African continent, for them to believe in themselves and in what they do?
So from an IOC point of view, we have a strategy that is coming to an end of this year. So 2021 to 2024 objectives. We have 21 objectives, and one of the objectives in our strategy focuses on participation and access of athletes. And it's broad athletes. And remember, the IOC is a global organization, but we do have membership in the 206 countries through the National Olympic Committees. And through this, NOCs can apply for various projects or programs through the Olympic Values Education Program of Olympic Solidarity to meet or to deal with their greatest needs. So in their context. And it's open, it's an open blank page. You create your program that you want to do and you apply for it, you get the support. So it's not the IOC really coming to the countries or to Africa to say, okay, we are going to come and do an education program on child pregnancy. We are going to come and maybe do promotion or women's menstruation and stuff. The NOCs that are responsible have to contextualize what they do because they know their regions better than the IOC. And they have this opportunity to apply for different programs. And if in Nigeria, for example, it's the young girls that are probably dropping out of school is the need, then the NOC applies for that and they get the support that they need to address the problem or the challenge.
Blandina.
Hi, I'm from Malawi. My question is, do you think that the perception of sports as a career has changed in Zimbabwe? Do you think more women that enter the industry, or is it the same as starting out?
No, definitely there's change. Definitely there's change. We've seen a number of women getting to leadership positions in sport. Our Minister of Sport is a woman, is an Olympian, Kirsty Coventry. Our Director General for the Sports and Recreation Commission is a woman. Our CEO for the National Olympic Committee is a woman. So there's been quite a shift in how people perceive or view sport, sport leadership or sport administration or involvement in sport. However, we still have remote places where girls cannot go to the same playing field as the boys, and girls are still having to take responsibilities at home, taking care of siblings and household chores when boys can go to the playground to play.
Any other questions? Yeah, Phil.
Hi, Phil. I'm from New Zealand. I was wondering, when you were working in athlete engagement, what was your processes to actually getting representative feedback about like the whole world and ensuring that you were getting it in IPC being across classifications, across sports, and throughout the whole of the NPCs?
So one of the governance mechanisms for the IPC to get feedback from athletes was the Athletes Council, or is the Athletes Council. So this is a body of athletes, Paralympians, who are elected by their peers at the Paralympic Games. So they represent the athletes. They're not there for themselves. So they represent the athletes. So each IPC committee or commission had an athlete representative sitting on it, because that was to ensure that the feedback from the athletes was included in all of the aspects of the IPC. So that was the main model or the main mechanism that the IOC uses to get feedback directly from the athletes. And also, in addition to that, we used to have every 2 years an International Athletes Forum, whereby two Paralympians from each NPC came to a forum to discuss different key topics, and they also, like, it was all athletes, which was really great, because then the IPC understood what are the priority topics for the athletes, what are the future trends for them, and what do we need to do as an administration or as a leadership, just to support and to make sure that the athletes are at the heart of the decision-making process.
James, James, and then sorry, I don't know your name at the back. One from the front and one at the back. James.
Okay, yeah, so my question, Primrose, is there now a greater emphasis for bidding cities and also the country that city is based in to demonstrate as part of their bid documentation what they're doing in that country around gender equality and inclusion? Is that a big requirement now?
So now, through the host city contract, in 2022, the IOC, so there's the host city contract and operational requirements for an OCOG that was to host the games. In 2022, the IOC introduced a mandatory requirement in the operational requirements of gender equality, diversity, and inclusion parameters to be observed. And what does that mean? Is for each OCOG has to develop their own strategy on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. And the emphasis is on mainstreaming, embedding that JEDI across all the different functional areas of the games. So going back to Paris, you saw that in Paris, in the sport functional area, you saw that in Paris, both men and women's games or competitions were played in the same venues, which is how they embedded gender equality in the sport. When you look at sport presentations, you will see that, okay, in the medal ceremony, the volunteers that are giving medals, they are different tolls or whatever, their race, etc. So it's about ensuring that you think about gender equality, diversity, inclusion lens in whatever aspect you're doing, when you're developing your policies, when you're developing your programs, when you're hiring. So the people management functional area, yes, they have to think about that. When you're talking about the opening ceremony or the ceremonies, they have to think about that. For those who watched the opening ceremony in Paris, it was a bit different, right? In terms of inclusion, yes, I know there are a lot of controversies, but inclusion, I think the principle is what's important to take note of. But yes, of course, gender is a requirement now. So they can't say, no, we don't do it, because they've signed. So that's our work.
Thanks. I have one from the back.
Yeah, my name is Precious. I'm a sports management master student from India, from Nigeria. So my question is in terms of equality, inclusion, and diversity. How does the IOC promote it beyond the games itself? Like that, does it extend to society, and like how does it go well beyond just the Olympic Games itself?
So I mentioned earlier that the IOC's 3 spheres of influence is the IOC as an organization. How are we doing it? IOC as the leader of the Olympic movement. How are we doing it so with the IFNOCs? IF is the owner of the Olympic Games. How can we incorporate this? We now have a newly formed 4th sphere, which is called Olympism 365. This is ensuring that the IOC also, with its power, we go beyond just the Olympic movement or the Olympic Games. We are in society. And Olympism 365 is really about access to sports, grassroots sports, and ensuring that, okay, all those dimensions are included in the projects that the IOC funds. So yes, the IOC started, and Olympism 365 is kind of new. It's probably 3 years now on implementing this. And it's not just gender equality that they implement, it's different dimensions. But of course, yes, the IOC has this 4th sphere as well.
Thanks. Any other questions?
No.
Sorry.
Oh no. This last question. Thank you so much, Primrose. It's been fascinating to hear all about you, and I'm sure the students are benefiting enormously from your insights. I just wanted to let the room know that Matteo, who has been to speak to the students recently, Primrose referred to quite early on when the questions were coming that being connected with people was really essential to succeed in this industry and to get the right connections. Matteo is doing a session on networking shortly, so if any of you feel quite intimidated by the thought of reaching out to professionals in this field or speaking networking, then please do join. It's only just been announced. It's not got the QR code all in common, but I'll send it across to Martin after. Is that all right? Just to help with build those connections.
Very important.
That'll be really useful for the sports management students here as well.
Very important.
Excellent, thanks. I'm worried I'm missing hands going up now. Any other questions? Dick.
What do you think about sort of mixed Olympic events, men and women competing in the same event in different formats, and how do you think that might develop?
Okay, my own personal assessment, I would say it's good, and it's in the middle for many reasons. I will give you an example of the relay, athletics relay, 4x100 meters mixed one. We from gender equality, we love it that it's balanced, you see the women, you see the men, whatever. But when you look at the technicalities of that event, the 4x1, the starter is always the strongest and the finisher the strongest. And most countries, what they do, they'll put the men as the starter, 2 girls in between, and then the finisher, So to strong gender equality advocates, this is not helping our cause, because we are still kind of like saying, okay, the guys are strong, they're the strongest, and the women can just be in between, just, to have the look or to have the numbers. So it's, from that point of view, it's kind of like, okay, should we do it really, or should we not? But another story is in judo. My colleague that I work with is an Olympian from judo, and they do have introduced mixed sports. And from him, what he explained to me was, ever since they've included mixed events in judo, the level of the women has improved or increased because of these mixed events. So when you look at it from that, because it's more competitive, it's stronger, it's faster, it's whatever. So when you look at it from that point of view, maybe the women who are competing in the 4x100 meters, they're a bit faster or in the race because they are competing with the men who are stronger, etc. So I think this will honestly have mixed reactions from different schools of thought. And then you also have those who strongly believe that it should never be done. because they say the women dilute the competitiveness level of the men. So looking ahead, knowing that we'll have esports games coming up, it'll be interesting to see how that's going to look like in terms of gender equality, you know. Knowing that the industry of esport is male dominated, and
That was amazing timing. Just as you mentioned esport, James put his hand up, and we all know that James legendarily hates esport.
I thought you were going to say, oh, okay, I'm putting in my name next year to compete.
But it was telling there are 5 minutes left, so no, you're okay, James. No pressure on you for an esport. Brilliant, thanks. My next question, maybe it's redundant from what you've said, but I don't think it is. Any advice to your younger self from where you are now, looking back at that kid who's being put off by the young men making derogatory comments on the basketball court, by the people who say, why on earth would you want to go into a sport?
I should have gone back there. And like, I'm going to play this game. I'm going to play with you guys sitting there.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it. I would say, don't be intimidated. Focus on what you want. Keep your eyes on the goal. It's never going to be a straight path. It'll be a path with daggers in the way. It will be a path with hurdles that you need to clear, etc. So don't you ever be intimidated. Go for what you want. Go for what you believe in.
And finally, then, looking to the people here from the Sports Management MSc, from the FIFA Master, what's one bit of advice you would give to the new generation of sports leaders who are in this room now?
I feel like, I know if I say this, maybe that, but anyway, I'll say it.
Don't hold back, Precious.
No, hold back. The industry, yes, it's small, but it's also so big. There's so many opportunities. And it's not just to look at one small little item to say, okay, I want to be a referee, I want to be a referee, I want to be a referee. No. Sport has grown so much, from science to psychology to business management to marketing to media in sport to anti-doping to para-sport classification. Like, there is so much. So what I would say is, you do yourself a favor to try to learn and understand what is out there and what is of interest to you, because there's so much. One of the things that I quickly learned in the FIFA Master was just to also open my mind to not just think about, I want this thing only, because there's so much more interesting stuff you can do in sport you could do. It's not just being a referee or coach or an administrator or a media person or a lawyer, sports lawyer. There is so much you can do. So much. And the FIFA Master, the beauty about what the FIFA Master can do is, because it's multidisciplinary, it's helping you not just to be put in this box that you can only work in this sports medicine, or you can only work in this sports law or in sports history, or in the multidisciplinary allows you to be like, what do you call this? It allows you to be able to have multiple options, unlimited options, as opposed to, let's say, you just did like sports marketing. So that's the beauty about the FIFA Master. So don't ever limit yourself, because you have the right tool, you have the right program that you're doing, and you've invested, and this is your time, your resources, and everything. You have to be kind to yourself to see yourself through to where you want to be in the end.
Fantastic advice. Primrose, it's been an absolute pleasure to welcome you back to Montfort and to give such inspiring talk on your journey to us. Thank you very much.
So, as the other co-scientific director here at De Montfort for the FIFA Masters, I wanted to just close out this wonderful celebration. And first, by thanking all of our speakers today and our moderator, and providing our thanks to CIES and especially Pierre Cornu for coming from Switzerland, to our Dean and the Faculty of Arts, Design, and Humanities, Jill Cowley, to the DMU Alumni Office and the DMU Events team, especially Blair Wilson, and of course, to the ever wonderful James Panter. This event has has been an excellent way to celebrate 25 years of the FIFA Masters and especially highlight the kind of historical content that students learn here at De Montfort on the Humanities of Sport module. And we also bring professional insight on related topics to students, which it's been so wonderful having Primrose here do that and demonstrate it so excellently in this session. As mentioned earlier, this is the opening event in a series of celebrations over the coming year at each of the FIFA Masters institutions. So the next ones will be in Milan at our partner SDA Bocconi, and then in Switzerland from our partner the University of Neuchâtel and also home of CIES. I think it's appropriate at this time to acknowledge and thank all of our previous DMU co-scientific directors for the work that they've done on the course in the previous years. And that list includes Ray Van Plu, Pierre Lanfranchi, Jeff Hill, Mike Kernan, and Richard Holt. So it's wonderful having two of the past directors here in the room. And it's also important to acknowledge the work of the module coordinators, which were not here at the very start, as I have learned very recently. And the module coordinator, the first year that those were implemented here in Leicester was Kevin Talek Marston, and then for the last 19 years, James Panter. This course has been an important part of the International Center for Sport History and Culture's history, and the center is very proud of being a course partner with CIES for these past 25 years. We hope you've enjoyed today and enjoyed being given a flavor of just some of the multidisciplinary themes that we cover here on the Humanities of Sport module. And we're pleased to have our 25th edition here in the audience. And we thank you all for attending and invite you to join us for a little drinks reception outside. Though we do ask the FIFA Masters 25th edition to kindly wait for a photograph before then going outside and joining everyone else. So thank you all for attending and being here for the first of our events celebrating the 25th anniversary of the FIFA Masters.